Maybe that was doing too much there with the music in the background. It all gets edited out in the VOD anyway. And but welcome back to the stream. Today we're going to continue reading Aristotle on the emotions. So I'm looking forward to continuing this series of close readings about Aristotle on the emotions. And I really love this reading, this part of the reading, but it's also something that right now, particularly, it feels close to me in my personal life. I wonder how you're feeling. How do you find yourself? Sometimes we say, how do you find yourself today? And we find ourselves in coming to understand how we feel. So hopefully, Aristotle, with all the ancient weirdness that he brings to this particular question, maybe he can help us find ourselves today and any day. So we're going to start today with moving first into maybe nicer territory than where we started out in the last stream with anger. This is philia, or friendship. And a lot of people have made a lot of hay out of the fact that Greek has different words for love. Agape versus eros versus philia, and then there are even a few others. I'm not sure that this is very unique to Greek. I think that lots of terms have different terms for love. It really just depends on what you say. I mean, I think friendship is another term for love in English. But whether we say that those are terms for similar things or for different things, it's really a matter of emphasis. So here I think the kind of friendly feeling that Aristotle wants to think about is in the background of thinking about friendship almost as a political act. It's kind of a weird thing to think about. Why would friendship be political? Isn't that more concerning my private life? Perhaps it is. Perhaps it is for us. I don't know. But friendships are also the basis for alliances. And if politics is ultimately, in the broad sense, some way of thinking about how we organize shared life, common institutions, friendship is one of those institutions. And you might think about it in those terms. But that doesn't mean that he's not concerned with affection and all of these other things. You'll see as we read this that he's very concerned. So I'm trying to make the, rather than I have to keep dragging everything and changing the sizing of this window, I've just tried to zoom in, and hopefully I won't have to keep doing that. But if you're having trouble seeing it, at least at this setup, as you can see, I'm at work now. I have my office books behind me. But also I realized how bad the audio was last time, because I was being very hubristic, and I didn't have the mic right in front of me. And I had it on the setting where it does need to be right in front of you. So if you happen to come to the stream and you realize that the sound is bad, let me know. Even if it is on your side, I'd rather know. That way I can make a correction. Because the sound in the last one that was cutting out, it was clippy, it was pretty bad. And I apologize for that. So hopefully this time it will be better as we go through a little bit more on friendship. Now let me find the actual window where this is. Here it is. Okay. So this is Kennedy's little introduction here. I don't think this is too important. We can just skip right along and go to what Aristotle says. Let us say whom people like and whom they hate and why, after having defined friendliness and being friendly. Let being friendly, to philein, so that's what's that little Greek thing in there mean? Philein is, it's a terrible way of pronouncing it, but that's similar to in English we form infinitives with the word to. So we say to eat, to sleep, to rub one's eyes. And when you make an infinitive, it's making a noun out of a verb. We don't tend to think of infinitives because in English it looks like a prepositional phrase, but in a lot of other languages, the infinitive is one word. So philein is like to be friendly. But the tophelein is like makes it very much a noun. So that's actually like the in Greek, something like that. Just to give you a little bit of idea of thinking about being friendly as a noun. Okay. Let it be defined as wanting for someone what one thinks are good things for him, or her, of course, not what one thinks benefits oneself. And wanting what is potentially productive of these good things. So, what do I think is good for my friend? I think that it would be good for them to find someone that is really well suited to them. They've been chasing all of these people that are kind of mean. And in order to do that, maybe one of the things that would help them do that is to set them up with a online dating service or something. I don't know. And that would be means to the thing. That would be productive of the thing that I think is good. And that might be riddled with errors. People make bad judgments about what their friends need all the time. But that's partly what friendship is about, right? Coming to better understanding of what people need and how we can help them to get what we think is good for them. A friend is one who loves and is loved in return. So a little footnote here. Let's see what it says. This clause is double bracketed by Cassell as a late addition by Aristotle. So these are the kinds of concerns of philologists. When did this come in? Is this something we're less concerned about that? But it's nice to remember that even someone like Aristotle might have to revise and do second drafts, and he might change his mind throughout the course of his career. Things like that happen. And people think they are friends when they think this relationship exists mutually. So if you really like someone, but you don't think that they like you, calling them a friend is kind of maybe assuming too much, right? It has to be this mutual relationship, which makes friendship. It's strange to think about friendliness or friendship, really, as an emotion, it's really not an emotion, right? It goes back to pathos. It's one of those things that affects us and under which we go changes in judgment. This is what Aristotle here is concerned with. So emotions might be a kind of actually really more narrow band of those kinds of things. Emotions tend to focus on individual feeling rather than reciprocal feeling. Interesting. On these premises, a friend is necessarily one who shares pleasure in good things and distress in grievous ones. Not for some other reason, but because of the friend. So it's not, my friend doesn't like something if I'm like happy, my friend's happy because I am happy. It's important that that's the reason. For all rejoice when the things they want happen and grieve at the opposite. Now let's see, did this work? Can you still see it? Yeah, I think that should be fine. This makes it a little easier for me. Then I have to keep moving it around. Happen and grieve at the opposite. So distresses and pleasures are a sign of their wish. And friends are those to whom the same things are good and bad, and who have the same friends and the same enemies. In class earlier today, someone was like, I don't know about that having the same enemies business. People today are less likely to feel like they have enemies, or their enemies are some kind of abstraction. I wonder if this is maybe a consequence of an ancient society in which there are lots of factions and they're kind of unavoidable. It's pretty clear that your enemies are maybe that city-state that's trying to invade you. But I wonder if maybe we also do have enemies, but we're less inclined to admit it because morality is still complex. There's still a lot of variation in it, but perhaps it's changed a little bit. And that somebody said, love your enemies. If you really had enemies, this is kind of the playful thing I was saying in class. If you really wanted to be a good Christian, to follow Jesus' advice, which is to love your enemies, you'd have to have enemies. Huh. Weird. Maybe, is that the kind of consequence you want to take from it? Maybe not. But I think it's an interesting way to think about it. That enemies maybe are important in life for certain things. And friends are those to whom the same things are good and bad, and have the same friends and the same enemies. For they necessarily wish the same things. So the one who also wishes for another what he wishes for himself is evidently a friend to the former. Well, what happens when you want different things than what your friend wants? When you think your friend wants something that's bad? Well, yeah, again, these are things that tend to be the case. Aristotle's aware that there are exceptions, and there are all sorts of scenarios where that's not the case. But this tends to be the case. And he's kind of trying to give you, in a weird way that no one would probably do today, a kind of comprehensive account of the way things might be. So, but I think it's very useful. I still find it to be useful for myself. And people are friendly to those who have benefited them, either to them directly or to those they care for. If they have done them great benefit, or done it eagerly, or at opportune times, and for their sake. Also to those who they think wish to benefit them. If maybe somebody hasn't done something for you yet, but you're like, I think that they would. They are friendly also to the friends of their friends, and those friendly with those they themselves like, and those liked by those they themselves like. And of course, there are lots of exceptions here. Sometimes that's what upsets a friendship, is that new friends get introduced. You're like, I'm not so sure about these people. But that shows you why it doesn't really work out. You do want to like the same kinds of people with your friends. And if you don't, that could jeopardize the friendship. And they are friendly to those who have the same enemies, and they have the same enemies they have, and who hate those who they themselves hate, and who are hated by those they hate. Isn't that weird that you want your friend to be hated by the same people that hate you? He hasn't talked about hate yet, but maybe that's the idea of like, the reason people hate us is something about who we are. And if you're like me, then you'll be hated too. Okay. For the same things that seem good to all these as to themselves, so that they wish the same things as they do, which was the characteristic of a friend. And it's a little repetitive here. This idea of wanting the same things for your friend, from your friend, that your friend wants, is for him the biggest part of friendship. It's the defining characteristic of friendship. I wonder what you think about that. Further, they are friendly to those who are disposed to do good to others, in regard to money and safety. Therefore, they honor generous and brave people. It's easier to be friends with someone who's not selfish. It's hard to be friends with selfish people. Hard to find a way in. They are friendly also to those who are just, and they suppose those who do not live at the expense of others to be of this sort. Such also are those who live by their own efforts, and of these especially, those who live from the land, or else are craftsmen. I mean, this certainly seems strange. The idea that it's easier to be friend with someone who's a farmer or a craftsman. I think that's the idea of somebody who's, let's say, in an ancient economy. The division of labor is there, but there are a lot fewer kinds of things that you can be. Society is a lot simpler. So simple, in fact, that Plato thinks that he can kind of, in his dialogue, The Republic, tell you all of the kinds of jobs, basically. They're not, jobs is a little anachronistic, but all of the occupations that are necessary to run a society. But today, think of all of the kinds of crazy, the printer repairman, the person who supervises accounting. The division of labor is far more complex today. But I wonder whether people's occupations are part of how we feel towards them in terms of their friendship, in terms of our friendship. Do we trust certain kinds of occupations more than others, even when we're not directly dealing with them in those occupations? Maybe, maybe not. And they are friendly to those who are self-controlled, because not unjust, and to those who mind their own business, for the same reason. Those who mind their own business. Oh, my friends mind their own business. That's kind of a funny thing to say. Excuse me while I have some. This stream is sponsored by Polar. This is raspberry lime. Okay. We are friendly also to those with whom we want to be friends, if they seem to want it. But there's that kind of initial, like when you're starting to begin a friendship, where you're like not quite sure about who, like you kind of like some people, but you're not sure how they feel about you. When you have really gregarious people, they tend to have a lot of friends, maybe because, not necessarily because they're great friends, they might be, they might not be, but because they make it easy for that initial part of friendship to be overcome. Does that person like me or not? The person that's like, oh, hey, everybody's here, so good to see you. That kind of person makes a lot of friends because it's very clear that they're open to friendship. People who are a little bit more reserved, a little bit more shy. Maybe people who are quite generous when you're intimate with them, but are a little bit cold to strangers. Harder to become friends with, because you're not sure about that initial moment of that reciprocity. There's some guesswork involved. Further, they are friendly to those who are pleasant to deal with and to pass the day with. It's a good quality in a friend. It's bad to be with a friend where it's painful to pass time with them, such as those who are good-tempered and not critical of people's faults and not contentious or quarrelsome. People like to argue a lot, unless you like to spend the day arguing too. Maybe this can be something. But of course, if someone's contentious in this way, they're not just talking about someone who likes to argue about sports or argue about the canonicity of various Star Wars franchise commodities or something like that. They're talking about someone who's kind of quick to pick a fight, maybe with you. Harder to be friends with them. For all such are pugnacious, ready to fight. Ready to fight, that's what pugnacious means. And those are always fighting clearly, and those always fighting clearly want the opposite. So they don't want the same thing, right? And that's what friendship is about for him. And they are friendly to people like those who are ready to make or receive a joke. I love this part. People are ready to make or receive a joke. For in both cases, they are intent on the same thing as their neighbor, able to be kidded and kidding in good sport. I think I've thought quite a bit about this line in this passage of why joking is kind of essential for friendship. Someone in class today, again, made a really good point. They're like, well, it shows the trust you have. If you can kind of make fun of your friends, it shows that you kind of gesture to something that's beyond the trust that you would have with just kind of normal encounters with people, with strangers. If you were to make fun of a stranger, you would assume that they would get angry. So in making fun of a friend and showing that you're not worried that they'll get angry, you're showing that you have a deeper bond than you would with a stranger. So it's this kind of complex gesture of actually like trying to kind of poke or prod your friend as a way of showing friendship. And your friend being able to do it back is that reciprocity. Yeah. Someone who's like, who's good at taking jokes. Someone who you feel like you have to kind of like be really careful around. That might not quite be friendship, really. Right? And they are friendly to those who are neat in appearance and in dress and in all their way of life. Okay. I mean, who knows like why that one made it in there. It's kind of a weird thing to point out, but okay. All right, Aristotle. And they are friendly to those who are not critical of mistakes or of benefactions. For in both cases, they are not reproachful. So if someone, maybe like you have a friend who's pretty smart or kind of like very careful, they're always kind of reproaching everyone for what they're doing, even when they're right. They're like, you really shouldn't do that. You really shouldn't have gone out that night. You really shouldn't have dated him. All these kinds of things. Even though they're right, they can kind of get on people's nerves, right? We don't all want to live lives of perfect wisdom, do we? Oh, maybe Aristotle did. But people who are reproachful, that becomes a characteristic of their personality. Not always people we want to be friends with. You got to know how to let certain things go, right? And people are friendly to those not mindful of wrongs done to them, nor inclined to cherish their grievances, but who are easily appeased. Do you know people who cherish their grievances? I know kind of some people who almost kind of delight when something's done wrong to them. Because this becomes currency for all sorts of other exchanges. They're like, but you did this, but you did this. They keep bringing it up. It never exhausts itself. So it's almost for them a good thing when someone does something wrong to them. That's not a good way to live. I don't like that too much. That's kind of cherishing your grievances. And people are friendly to those not mindful of wrong. Okay. And they are friendly to those who do not say or want to know bad things about neighbors or friends. But look for good things. For the good person acts this way. Yeah, so gossip. This is gossip. You want to be friendly with a gossip? I mean, the thing is, people do gossip. So people love to gossip. Those gossip magazines at the checkout counter. There's some people, I think, who basically all of their free time, which is with other people, is taken up with gossip. They don't really do anything else. But that is always a kind of dangerous way to spend your time, because people always can have in the back of their mind, well, if we're gossiping together and having fun, how do I know when I'm not around? Are you not gossiping about me? So trusting a gossip can become hard, and maybe makes you second guess whether you want to be friendly with them. And they are friendly to those who do not oppose others when the latter are angry or being serious. Persons are pugnacious again. And they are friendly to those taking them seriously in some way. For example, admiring them and regarding them as serious people and finding pleasure in them. If you always make fun of your friends, you can kind of take it too far. So there's a kind of balance in friendship. You have to be able to kind of take and receive jokes, but there has to be a moment where you can turn away from that and say, okay, but seriously, that was really interesting what you said. If you're always kind of joking and clowning, joshing on each other, that kind of friendship can become, I don't know, I've seen it become really dangerous, toxic, as people say now. Really toxic kind of friendship, where it becomes kind of poisoned. There's no moment where you can break from that. Everything is always up for derision. There's no sense of the boundary between my deep concerns and that showing of trust. And so it really no longer becomes trust. It becomes a kind of contest of who can out-clown the other person. And, maybe when you're young, you can have friendships that are meaningful like that. But as you grow older, it becomes a little more tiresome to have people who just always want to joke around. They don't have anything else to offer. That's my opinion. And especially those feeling this way about what they wish to be admired in themselves, or in regard to what they want to be serious about, or what they find pleasure in. And they are friendly to those who are like themselves and have similar interests, provided they do not become annoying, or get their livelihood from the same source. For then it becomes the case of a potter against potter. So there's a certain amount of similarity that's good. We share interests. People, this is kind of common sense now, isn't it? Yeah, we share the same interests, that's why we're friends. But if they're too close and they become a competitor, then it's potter against potter. The narcissism of small differences. And they are friendly to those who long for the same things, when it is possible, to share them at the same time. But if that is not possible, the same result follows as in the previous case, meaning competition. People have friendly feelings also toward those with whom the relationship is such that they are not ashamed in their presence of things that might be thought, unless the others show contempt. And they are friendly toward those whose prestige they would like to attain. So I think that sometimes this line gets a little... I should have had my other translation here to kind of give you... Let me see if I have it handy. If I can find it. Well, it's probably like right next to me and I just don't see it right now. This is the kind of thing that's likely to happen to me. But I think what he means here is not so much that you want to like steal their prestige that they have from others for yourself, but that you want their recognition. You admire them. You care about their opinion. And so we're friendly towards them because we want their good opinion of us. And those by whom they wish to be emulated and not envied. So if I want someone to admire me and not to envy me, let's say maybe I am a little bit better at sports, or maybe I am a little more eloquent, but I like this person and I don't want them to see me as a competitor, then I act friendly towards them. And they are friendly to those with whom they join in doing good, unless greater evils are going to result for themselves. They are also friendly to those who show equal affection for their friends, both absent and present. Both absent and present. Therefore, all people like those who are such in regard to the dead. How do you feel about those who have passed in the person's life? I think sometimes this can be really hard when you're, after you've lost someone close to you. Making new friends or finding a partner after that point, if that person never knew the person that was close to you. I think when people are grieving, often they experience this thing of like not wanting any new friends because that person they feel like that person can't understand who they are because they're so identified, at least in the moment of grief, with who they have lost. And that person can't ever experience that person, at least as they would want them to. This can be quite difficult. This can really hurt relationships too. I think one thing that helps through that process of grief is being able to speak well of the dead. Not just in the sense of say nice things, but to try to characterize them and bring out the qualities of that person and those particular stories that make them feel alive for people who don't know them. And that actually, I think, can help with grief and with not moving on in the sense of no longer being hurt, but not trying to live in a state of grief where everything has to remain frozen in time. And that is something that happens sometimes when grief is deep. When grief is deep. My tongue got tied there. And they like those who are not deceitful with them. Such are those who even tell them their faults. So it seems like some of these things are contradictory, right? But of course, they are and they aren't. That a friend who is able to who doesn't stand in the way of who you want, who's not always reproachful, but who is, at certain important moments, willing to kind of tell you your faults. I mean, to be a good friend requires a quite virtuosic performance of all of these various virtues. Being really sensitive to where the other person is. Knowing when to be one way and when to be another way. Are your friends that virtuosic? Are they well adapted to your needs and wants? Can they understand where you're at? Are you a good friend in that respect? I think we don't like to think about friendship as a performance because for whatever reason in our culture, performance is something that's thought of as to be inauthentic. But I think that's weird. If you think about someone who's performing a piece, performing Shostakovich or something, it's not inauthentic to perform it. There's no other way for it to become real. Things become real in being performed. So how you perform friendship is how you realize it, how you actualize it. That's what's happening in the rhetorical idea of friendship. How do people make friendship appear to others? Not the sense because it just appears. There's something else lurking behind it. There might be a lot of things lurking behind the appearance of friendship. Some of those things might be friendly feelings. They might even be deeper feelings. I mean, how many of us have had the experience of a friend who we care really deeply about? But in the form of friendship that we find ourselves in, it's difficult to express the depth of our affection for that person. Because we are maybe only used to doing the joking around kind of friendship or the having a good time kind of friendship. But you really do care about this person. How can I show them how much I care? This is a question of performance, not a question of inauthenticity. In fact, if you don't learn how to perform, you might be forced to live an inauthentic life where you only can express the superficial, habitual form of friendship and other things. And we like those who are not intimidating and with whom we feel secure. For no one likes a person he fears. That maybe seems funny and obvious, but there's a deep truth there. It's hard to like someone that you fear. I think a lot of children experience this growing up. Maybe you fear your parents. And coming to terms with the fear that you have of your parents is part of what you need to do in order to learn how to love your parents. Some parents or guardians do not make it easy and will never be loved for that reason. So the species of friendship are companionship, intimacy, kinship, and other such things. So kinship he includes in here, right? So that the family is part of this. But kinship is beyond just what we think of as kinship, right? People kind of can make kin in different cultures that look very different from the strange form of family that has emerged in modern culture. Doing a favor is productive of friendship, and doing it unasked and not advertising what has been done. For in this case, it seems to have been done for the sake of the friends and not for some other reason. If I keep telling my friends all the nice things that I'm doing for them, or let's say in a romantic relationship, oh yeah, well, I did the dishes. doesn't really seem like I'm doing it for you. It seems like I'm doing it for something that you're going to do for me that I'm expecting. That's a different kind of reciprocity. The reciprocity of exchange as opposed to the reciprocity of feeling. In friendship, there's a reciprocity of we want the same things for each other. We want good things for each other. The reciprocity of exchange is I'm giving you something of this value and you give me something of equal value. Different kind of reciprocity. Very different kind of reciprocity. Usually. Okay, now we get into enmity and hate. So welcome to the stream if you're here. Happy to chat with you about this or really anything of that's related to the emotions and what's kind of in this account or different in this from this account that you think might be interesting to think about or relevant to your life. Feel free to comment now, or if you're coming to this as a recording, leave a comment on YouTube and I'll get back to you or talk about it in a future stream or video. The nature of enmity, ekthra. It sounds better in Greek. Ekthra. It sounds like a Klingon word or something. And hating, tomizain, right? So that's that infinitive form again. That verb as a noun is evident from the opposites of what has been said about friendliness. Anger, spite, and slander are productive of enmity. So we already talked about anger in the last stream. So anger can produce other things. Enmity. Enmity might be, it's not a word we use too much, but it's pretty similar to hate. Pretty similar to hate. We'll see how close it maps onto our idea of hate as we read more about it. Now, anger comes from things that affect a person directly, but enmity also from what is not directed against himself. For if we suppose someone to be a certain kind of person, we hate him. So even if someone doesn't necessarily directly impact my life, they haven't slighted me. This is the idea of anger that he has, right? Someone insults me or slights me or belittles me, my dignity, the people I love, the things I care about. And therefore, I'm angry at them. If I hate them for being a kind of a person that I dislike. It might even be a person in the past I've never heard about. Oh, I hate that person. And anger is always concerned with the particulars, directed, for example, at Callias or Socrates, while hate is also directed at types of people. Everyone hates the thief and the sycophant. So this is a very interesting moment. And it's a moment where Aristotle I just saw a meme on Twitter of like Aristotle doing like boo and it was Holly and it said Aristotle and then now I said it. Oh my gosh. Where Aristotle becomes a little more controversial. And it's hard, I'm not sure that I agree with this analysis, but it's an interesting distinction to make, whether I would make the distinction using anger versus hate, but there is that kind of negative feeling that it might be different if it's directed towards a person for some reason of something that happened, in my lifetime, versus hating a kind of a person. Everyone hates the thief. So yeah, I hate thieves, I say. But it would be weird to be like angry against the category of thieves. Because what's the action that I would take there? Maybe it's like Javert from Les Mis, and he wants to kind of use the penal code, at least in the beginning, to correct society. But I wonder if that really comes out of anger. It seems maybe it comes out of like a moral rectitude that's a little bit too wrecked. I don't know. While hate is directed also at types. Okay. The former, anger, is curable in time. The latter, hatred of types, is not curable. And I don't think that Aristotle's saying that. I don't think that he's probably saying that once you hate some kind of person, you can never not hate them. But I think what he's trying to say is that unless the reason for your hatred changes, it won't just kind of dim in time, which it will with anger, even if the reason remains the same. Like it's hard to just remain angry for a long period of time, but you can be hateful to the end. The former is the desire that the other may feel pain, the latter that he may suffer evil. I wonder what the distinction there is. What do you think? For one who is angry wants his anger perceived. here's where it gets interesting. But to the one who hates it does not matter whether the object of his hatred knows it. So, when we talked about the revenge fantasies that people have when we talked about anger, and wanting them to know when Odysseus says, I am Odysseus, right? He has to announce who he is at the end, because he wants his vengeance to be known by the enemy. And in that weird way, the enemy against who we are taking our vengeance is kind of an equal. We want them to recognize us. The person that we hate, we believe, is inferior to us in a categorical way. We don't care whether they know about our hate. That's what Aristotle is saying. This is a dark side of human emotion. Painful actions inflicted by one person on another are all perceived by the senses, but the greatest evils, injustice and thoughtlessness, are least perceived. For the presence of evil causes no pain. So, pain and suffering, someone getting beat up, it's very clear that got inflicted by somebody, right? Not that all pain comes from a person, of course. But whereas, maybe wealth inequality isn't necessarily perceived unless it's kind of made visible, unless you use symbolic communication to show it forth in a speech, maybe with graphics. What is the level of wealth inequality in our society? If you made $500 or $5,000 every day since the time of the periods, you still wouldn't have as much money as just Jeff Bezos. It's trying to make people perceive the level of inequality in a society. But it doesn't necessarily cause pain. I mean, I think you could say at some of the consequences of that inequity produce profound pain and suffering. But it's hard to trace that all back, because there's so many other factors that intervene. So it's hard for people to see it that way. So anger is also accompanied by pain, but hate is not accompanied by pain. For the angry person is himself pained. The angry person is himself pained, the one who hates is not. Now, lots of traditions have taken a different view on this. Buddhism, for instance, says hate and anger both kind of poison us. Aristotle doesn't agree. He's like, you can hate pain-free. I hate the thief. This doesn't cause me pain. One who is angry might feel pity when much has befallen the person he is angry at. But one who hates under no circumstances. For the former wants the one he is angry at to suffer in his turn. The latter wants the detested class of persons not to exist. So think of the difference between that. I want you to suffer. That's anger. I don't want you to exist. That's hatred. Hey aliens, I see that you've put something, but it just looks like blank to me. So I don't know if that's an error or what. But I don't know. Maybe I'm kind of convincing myself that this distinction that Aristotle's making between anger and hatred, I go back and forth on it, but I think maybe there is something to that. Maybe there is a reason to make that distinction, even in those terms. From this, then, it is evident that it is possible for a speaker both to demonstrate that people are enemies and friends, and to make them so when they are not, and to refuse those claiming to be, to bring those who through anger or enmity are on the other side of the case, over whatever feeling he chooses. Now remember, this is in the rhetoric, so he's concerned with how we move people in and out of feelings through speech, or we could say more broadly, through symbolic communication of whatever sort we use. Even the emotions themselves, to display an emotion, can be a form of communication, even for animals. So I don't think we have to limit it to just words, but it's really important for Aristotle to understand that the reasons people feel things are based on their interpretation of some things that happened in the world. And so we tell each other stories about what happened, and our belief in various stories of what happened affects us in our bodies. We get angry at a story that we hear, Nothing happened to me. But I hear the story and say, that shouldn't have happened. That's terrible. And it's based on the persuasiveness of that elaboration or interpretation of events. Fear. Let fear, phobos, be defined as a sort of pain and agitation derived from the imagination of a future destructive or painful evil. So a lot of what Aristotle kind of tries to do this with the genres of speaking, he says that they each have a kind of tense, so that forensic rhetoric, which is kind of mostly what happened in the courtroom in Athens, is about the past, whereas deliberative is about the future. This kind of stuff, I don't know if it works too well, because there are a lot of what you're deliberating about is you have to talk about, well, what did happen in the past. But I think he's talking about the judgment, the judgment that actually the audience has to make. If I'm a juror, I have to make a judgment about what did happen. If I'm a part of a assembly that's deliberating about something, I have to think about what we ought to do in the future. And then, of course, there's Epideictic. And he says the Epideictic, which these are speeches of praise and blame, he's like, that's about the present. That's the one I find the least convincing. But that involves like a whole conversation we're not going to have. But I think even with the emotions, there's this idea of that they involve different forms of time. Not like time like, with the clock, but time in the sense of human memory, attention, and anticipation. So the past is what we remember, but is it really? I mean, memory, I think it's better to think about it as memory. Memory can be fictional. Memory can be a historical memory that's not something I actually experienced. It's mixed up with the imagination, all these kinds of ways. But we assume that the object of memory is something from the past. It's really hard to remember the future. Whereas if we anticipate something, even though often what we're anticipating is on the basis of something that we've previously experienced, the object for our anticipations is, this is what is going to happen. And then our attention, what we attend to, is things that feel present to us. So I think if you think about past, present, and future, not in some sense of some metaphysics of time, but in those different attitudes that we have of attention, memory, anticipation, we're closer to the rhetorical understanding of temporality. And by the way, memory, attention, anticipation, I didn't come up with those. St. Augustine did. So, I don't know. Take it up with him if you don't like it. Sometimes people find it weird that I call some people saints. And it's true, I was baptized in the Catholic Church. But I think it's interesting to just kind of call, like we call Gandhi Mahatma Gandhi. But I think people think that's his first name. Or Mother Teresa, I guess that is Catholic still. But like Mahatma is not his name. That's like a term, an honorary term. And I like to use the honorary terms for people that other people have given them when possible. I think it adds a little color to their historical personage. It's interesting to think about someone who said something weird as someone who also is a saint, or those kinds of things. I find that to be, this is a sidebar, I kind of like to keep those things. I'm trying to think of other ones. Like, refer to the Dalai Lama. I mean, it would be weird to like refuse to refer to the Dalai Lama as the Dalai Lama. Why not? Okay. For what is far off is not feared. Okay, yeah, sorry. For all evils are not feared. This is an important... Right here at the beginning, Aristotle's getting philosophical. It's weird. It's almost like he's a philosopher. For example, a person does not fear that he will become unjust. This is almost like a little bit of a joke here. No one fears that they'll become unjust. Oh man, I'm so worried that I'll be unjust. Or slow-witted. But of course, people do become unjust. And people do become slow-witted. But only what has the potential for great pains or destruction. So not everything that's bad, but only things that cause pain. Or the end of life, death. And these only if they do not appear far off, but near. So that they are about to happen. It's that anticipation, a mode of anticipation. For what is far off is not feared. All know that they will die. But because that is not near at hand, they take no thought of it. Or at least they don't think it is near at hand. So the young do not fear death. This old saw. But there's truth in it. So we fear what we feel is near and what will be painful or destructive to us. If this is what fear is, and remember, and also it's from an imagination. So people fear things all the time that aren't really near to them, but the imagination can be both true or false. But if you want to understand how people are feeling, you do need to deal with their imagination of things. Because all of our fears are based on our imaginations of things. That's not a way to get rid of someone's fears. Say, oh, that's just your imagination. Everyone's fears are imaginary. That doesn't mean that they're false. They can be false, but just because they're imaginary doesn't mean they're false, because it's something in the future. We have to imagine it. There's no other way to approach that. Imagination here, of course, doesn't just mean daydreaming. For Aristotle, even forms of calculation, of anticipation, of thinking about what's most likely to happen could be part of an imagination of a future destructive or painful evil. So if this is what fear is, such things are necessarily causes of fear, as seem to have great potential for destruction or for causing harms that lead to great pains. Therefore, even the signs of such things are causes of fear, for that which causes fear seems near at hand. This is danger, an approach of something that causes fear. So you start to get afraid when you see a sign of something that you think is destructive. People get afraid of omens, right? Oh, the crows are there. That means something bad is near. Or the comet is coming. Or the plague. Are they more afraid of the plague, or what the plague, taken as an omen, means for the coming destruction? But also it can be things that are less superstitious. Political events seem to start taking a turn for the worse. And you're like, this is scary, not necessarily because of this actual event. If this were the end of it, I wouldn't be that scared, but because it seems to spell out a tendency or a trend that will be much worse. Such signs are enmity and anger from those with the power to do something, for it is clear that they wish to, and thus they are near doing it. And injustice is such a sign when it has power. For the unjust person is unjust by deliberate choice. Someone willing to be unjust flagrantly, who has power, that's not a good sign. Because they're not going to then say, oh yeah, I know, that was just one injustice. I just wanted to show you what I could do. Now, they're going to do more of that, right? That's the idea. And outraged virtue is such a sign when it has power. For it is clear that when a person is outraged, he always chooses to act. And now, he can. It's like a movie trailer that Aristotle throws in there. Outraged virtue, coming to theaters near you. And another sign is fear on the part of those with the power to do something, for necessarily such a person is also in readiness to act. So all of these things, we fear what is powerful in the most basic sense of what is capable of doing something. If something seems impotent, even if we think that it's evil, we don't fear it. It's only when it has power that we fear it. Since most people are rather bad, Aristotle, no cap from Aristotle, since most people are rather bad, slaves of profit-making and cowardly in danger, being at the mercy of another is in most cases a cause of fear. What do you think about that? So that the accomplices of one who has done something dreadful are feared by him, in that they may inform on him or leave him in the lurch. And those able to do wrong are a cause of fear to those who are able to be wronged. This is why it's hard to rob a bank. I mean, on the one hand, it's hard to rob a bank because banks have a lot of security and you could get shot by the police. But it's also hard to rob a bank because in order to rob a bank, you need other people. You can't do it alone. But once you have people who are willing to rob a bank with you, what else are they willing to do? Might they turn around and shoot you and take your share of the money? So it's that old saw, there's no honor among thieves. It's hard, you need trust in order to successfully carry out a heist. But it's hard to find trust among people who are so willing to violate so many other things in order to carry out a heist. And others who are feared are those who have been wronged or think that they have been wronged. For they are always watching for an opportunity for revenge. There's a lot of Elizabethan theater. It's about these kinds of characters. The malcontents who put on a happy face, but they're looking for revenge. They called these plays revenge tragedies. Also, those who have done wrong, if they have power, are feared, being apprehensive of suffering in their turn. So this is an interesting moment. Someone who is a victim, once they take power, are feared because there's the assumption that they will want vengeance. And this does happen in politics. And if you think about the Rwandan genocide, well, I don't want to use that example because maybe it's too easy to misunderstand. But let's just say there are many instances in which people who have become victims then become in power and then can use their power to return into the cycle of victimage. And how do we break out of that? How do we break out of that cycle of wrongdoing? Because it makes sense. We understand why people want vengeance, even if we think it's wrong. We understand why it's pleasurable. We just talked about that in the last stream with anger. And we just talked about hatred. We don't want those people to exist anymore. Well, societies have to confront this in many ways. They're different. There was in South Africa the Truth and Reconciliation Committees, which is one approach to this. It's interesting to think about. People have written a lot about that process, and there are critiques of it and variations on whether it was successful or not. But it does seem to have been more successful than simply saying, oh, well, let's pardon everyone and move on. Like there needed to be some accounting for what had gone wrong. People who were perpetrators needed to admit that they were this in order for there to be healing. But they also realized it was too great of a crime to be punished by putting people in prison or something like that. This crime was too endemic to the society. Difficult, deep, profound problems. But problems, if we want to address, maybe we do have to study this emotion stuff. This emotion stuff is baked in to what will work and what will not when we're trying to achieve things like justice and peace and healing. You can't just hope everyone has friendly feelings towards each other. It's not going to work. And people fear those that seem a cause of fear to others who are stronger than they are. For they could harm them more if they could even harm those who are stronger. And for the same reason, those are feared who attack those weaker than they are. For they are either the cause for fear or will be when they have grown stronger. And among those wronged and enemies or rivals, it is not the quick-tempered and outspoken who are feared, but the calm, and those who dissemble, and the unscrupulous. For with these it is unclear if they are close to acting, with the result that it is never evident that they are far from doing so. Which is a very interesting line. If you have somebody who gets angry a lot, right? But like the signs of their anger are very clear. They're like, how dare you? It's like, when they're calm that they're probably not about to be angry. But someone who is dissembling, meaning they pretend, they're like, oh yeah. They put a little poison in your lemonade. Come on over. These kinds of people you have to be careful of. Unscrupulous, calm, dissembling, cold, Machiavels. Of course, Machiavelli was not even close to being born yet, so they didn't have that idea of the Machiavel. And of course, Machiavelli wasn't a Machiavel, but this idea of the Machiavel, which again comes out of the theater of someone who is calculating and cold. Same kind of character. All fearful things are more fearful insofar as something cannot be set right by those who have made a mistake, and is either wholly irremediable, or not in their power, but in the power of their opponents. I've underlined this passage because I find it both confusing and helpful. I wonder what you think about it. All fearful things are more fearful insofar as something cannot be set right by those who have made a mistake. And is either wholly irremediable or not in their power, but in the power of their opponents. So if you can fix something, if you can fix a mistake, it actually means that there's less fear in a situation. But if a situation is really static, if everything that happens has to have consequences to it, this is one way to understand it, then the whole atmosphere becomes more fearful. Because the consequences, whether it's you making a mistake or someone else making a mistake, there are going to be consequences for action. if there's a lot of ability to correct, to mediate, to repair, things can be calmer and easier. This makes me think about all sorts of situations that we're in. Like, what kind of workplace do you want to work in? Do you want to work in a workplace where every time that someone messes up, they get fired? I mean, I don't think anyone would want to work in that kind of workplace. Sometimes classrooms feel this way. People are afraid to make a mistake, which is very sad, because if we can't make mistakes while we're learning, there's never going to be a time when we can safely make mistakes. You know what I'm saying? So, and they're more fearful when there are no sources of help or no easy one. In a word, things are fearful that are pitiable when they happen or are going to happen to others. Fearful things, then, and what people fear are pretty much, so to speak, the greatest things. They're great, not greatest things in that sense, great in the sense of the most profound, those of greatest magnitude. Let us now speak about the state of mind of those who are afraid. Okay, so how does fear change how we think? If fear is accompanied by an expectation of experiencing some destructive misfortune, it is evident that no one is afraid if he is one of those who thinks he will suffer nothing. People fear neither things they do not think they will suffer, nor others by whom they do not think they will be harmed, and not at a time when they do not think so. Necessarily, then, people who think they might suffer something are in fear, and those who think they are going to suffer at the hands of those from whom they expect to suffer, and they fear these and things at this time. It's passages like that that make people not like Aristotle too much. But remember, once again, these are lecture notes that are assembled, after he's dead, and so the writing might suffer, and it's in translation. There's lots of things that make it sometimes the prose a little bit torturous. Those experiencing and thinking they experience great good fortune do not think they might suffer. Therefore, they are insolent and belittlers and rash, like if somebody thinks they can't get the coronavirus because they're wealthy or powerful and they don't wear a mask. Then they become rash and insolent, and they belittle other people. Wealth, strength, and abundance of friends, power makes them so. Exactly. Nor are those afraid who think they have already suffered all the dreadful things possible and have become coldly indifferent to the future, like those actually being done to death. And this is a much different scenario of someone who's so kind of bitter about life because they've been so harmed and victimized. Again, that's you, aliens, so I'm very sorry to hear that. I doubt that, though, because you're coming to this stream very regularly. You seem to have something left in you, some curiosity. Can aliens please abduct me? Well, I think we all have the experience of being like, at some times in our lives, being like, oh man, I kind of wish I wasn't born. This is, the Greeks call this the wisdom of silence. And Aristotle talks about it a few times, where, yeah, I wish I just wasn't born. Like, what a bother. Or, things are going really badly in your life and you don't have a lot of hope. You can get close to despair. And that's a real feeling that a lot of people have. But I do think that if we have fear still, we still have fear for other people that we care about, for things that we care about, if we have hope that things won't go, even if it's a negative hope, like I hope things won't get worse, we're not quite at the level of which Aristotle's talking about, of someone who is so embittered by life, they really don't care about anyone else either. I have a hard time believing that would fit you. I mean, even if what you're hoping for is aliens coming, you're hopeful that the alien society maybe figured things out better than we did here on planet Earth. Yeah. Oh boy. Planet Earth. Why did I have to be on this planet? I don't know. Are there planets better? I don't know. Maybe they are. Like Ebenezer Scrooge. Yeah, like Ebenezer Scrooge he's more in the sight of someone who's like really insolent because he like got everything he wanted. He's another kind of character too, because he has that in A Christmas Carol, which is the novel where Scrooge appears, by Dickens. He doesn't have, or the Grinch. Oh, you're in a very Christmassy mood. It's a little strange in October? Is it October? I'm kind of like losing my mind a little bit, so I can't tell what month it is anymore. Yeah, the Grinch, right? Like, these are people that are embittered and they want. So, like, the Grinch is a different scenario, right? The Grinch kind of is like angry and vengeful, and resentful, really, even more so than angry. It's never too early to be Christmassy. I strongly disagree, but I'll let that one pass. We can debate that another time. Okay. But the Grinch, I think the Grinch, he doesn't want to see other people happy when he is happy, but it turns out that he just needed someone to show him a little bit of love and affection, and his heart grew 3 sizes that day. Remember that part of it? So both of those stories, I think, are about people who were like maybe seemed close to the bottom, but they still had something in them. But I do think sometimes it comes like, talk about something really dark. When we talk about child soldiers, and people talk about how that's a war crime. Well, why is that particularly a war crime? And this doesn't necessarily always happen in war. Like, sometimes people are recruited into gangs at very young ages. Or, in another dark way, into prostitution at very young ages. And I think the kind of hardening process of somebody who is kind of forced, who's both victim and forced to do terrible things in order to survive, means that they might be so traumatized by that experience that without some very serious interventions and a kind of complete change of their circumstances in life, won't be able to find a way to care about other people, at least as they used to. Anyway, that's not. I am not actually in the mood to talk about it. It's too dark for me today. But I do think that those things are real, and they exist. People who really are other people kind of use violence and in such a way to kind of form people who are hopeless. I don't know. That's truly evil, though, to do that to children, isn't it? Truly evil. The result is that whenever it is better for a speaker's case that that is the members of the audience, experience fear, he should make them realize that they are liable to suffering. So he's saying that if you want your audience to be afraid, well, why would you want your audience to be afraid? Let's first of all stop there. Usually because you want them to do something. I want you to take the coronavirus seriously. So I need you to understand what can happen to you, even if you're a young person. You think you're immune because you're a young person. You don't know some of the side effects. Even if you survive it, you can have chronic lung problems. You can lose your sense of taste, right? These kinds of things of making people fearful are ways to try to motivate them to take precautions. And so Aristotle's trying to kind of remind us that what we need to do, it doesn't seem pleasant to remind people that they can suffer, but sometimes it's necessary in order to get people to be motivated to help themselves. It's got to be part of your toolbox. At the hands of those from whom they did not expect it, and suffering things they did not expect at a time when they were not thinking of the possibility. So maybe the possibility hasn't occurred to them. Like, oh God, I never thought of that. I didn't think that could be a problem for me. It's like, yeah, exactly. That's why I don't want you to do that. When you're trying to help kids understand, you're like, well, why can't I just jump wherever I want to go? It's like, you could break your bones. Do you understand what's inside your body, you little child? You have bones in there. They can break, And you don't want to freak the child out. So you have to be careful. You don't want to freak someone out so that they'll stop moving around, right? You don't want to make them too fearful. And it's a careful calibration of helping people imagine bad things so that they don't do things that lead to the bad things, but also not making them so fearful that they become kind of imprisoned in fear. It's a difficult task and probably impossible to master. We just have to be really careful and thoughtful about how we use fear and generate fear. Since it is evident what fear and fearful things are, and what is the state of mind of those who are afraid, it is evident from this also what it is to be confident, and what sort of things people are confident about. I want to say one more thing about fear, even before we go into confidence. Fear is also manipulative. True, Fear can be very manipulative. You know what else can be manipulative? Every emotion. Every emotion can be manipulative. And this is one thing that people have criticized rhetoric of for a long time. Like, wow, you're manipulating people. You're teaching people how to manipulate other people. But if you want to motivate people in any way, someone could take the position that you're manipulating people. I think that it bypasses logic in a way. I mean, I'm not sure what you mean by that. Because to me, it's like if I'm giving people the reasons why they should be afraid of something, and they accept those reasons, the fact that emotion is part of that doesn't seem to me to bypass logic. Because if I was to say, well, I don't believe your reason, so therefore I'm not afraid of that happening. If someone says, if Chicken Little comes and says the sky is falling, I'm going to be like, I don't think that it is. I'm not afraid of that. My reason resists the fear. So what do you mean by bypasses logic? This could be important. Use this opportunity to sip on water. I'm kind of a partisan in this matter because there's a long tradition of people trying to separate reason and emotion for various purposes that I think are manipulative. I do think that there's a distinction to be made between manipulation and persuasion. And one of them is that ignoring facts. Well, if you're ignoring the facts, then I don't think that you're being... ignoring facts can happen in any situation, right? People who are not taking seriously the coronavirus are ignoring all sorts of facts. So partly what's important is how we present the facts, which ones we select, for what purposes. So the facts don't motivate people by themselves. They have to be kind of selected, arranged. People have to have some relationship to them. People have to believe in them. All of these kinds of things that don't emerge just from establishing something through, scientific method. If scientific method was enough, we wouldn't have all of these problems of people who fear vaccines. So the fear that people have, or fear wearing a mask, or object to wearing a mask, maybe they don't fear it, they object to it for some other reason. If you want to motivate people, you can't put the emotions to one side and say, I don't want to touch emotions. That's manipulative. It's wrong to touch emotions. Well, what do you think motivations are? They're how people feel about things. It's what they're motivated to do is how they feel about things. And people don't feel things without content. And so I think it's wrong to separate reason and emotion. We reason our ways into different emotions. When someone tries to calm us down, maybe they just give you a back rub. But often they try to kind of put it in perspective. Like, look, you're afraid about all these things. Let's focus on all the positive outcomes. You're not thinking of those. What is present to someone's thought? I'm not trying to manipulate them when I'm trying to calm them down. I'm trying to give them a different perspective by making present to them things that they haven't considered. And is that changing the emphasis? Yes. Is emphasis a fact? No. So that means that the facts are not enough. What's important? Well, our emotions make certain things salient to us, but also speech and communication do that, and that can change people's feelings and emotions. Is knowing how to do that or having some practice in doing that, practice in manipulation? I guess it could be. I can't really say that it can't be manipulation, but I don't really know what the alternative is. Should we not deal with people's emotions? Should we only talk to people in this strange language of pure fact? I don't even know what that is, to be honest. So I tend to be kind of a partisan here, as I was saying, of saying that I think that it's absolutely necessary that we get our hands dirty and think about emotions. I think it's the intent. I like the idea of intent a lot, but I think that it gets a little bit messy. I think intent is important, but it's hard to know what the intent is. Sometimes it's even hard to know our own intentions. Sometimes maybe we have unconscious motives. But I think that's a fair way to kind of broadly differentiate manipulation and persuasion. And I think manipulation also sometimes involves things like coercion, or it involves things like bribery. So I think that actually what makes persuasion unique is that it relies upon reason to try to get people to desire their own outcome. Yeah, motivation, right. But what's interesting about motivational speaking, though, just as a little bit of a sidebar, are those TED Talks. You know what the TED Talks never do? almost ever, I shouldn't say that. There's a lot of them, so maybe I'm not sure. They tend to try to lead. They might talk about fear. They'd be like, "Wow, we have a lot of big problems. Fear, climate change, fear." They don't ever end with fear. And I think one of the things that TED Talks, I don't like TED Talks very much. A lot of my students are like, "Oh, TED Talks, those are examples of good speaking." I don't really like the TED Talks because I think that what the end result of a TED Talk is kind of entertainment. It's supposed to leave us with a good feeling like other people are addressing the problems. Other people have defined the problems, other people have researched the problems, and other people are taking care of the problems. So really, a TED Talk doesn't motivate you at all. It demotivates you. But it makes you feel nice and pleasant. Maybe it motivates you to continue doing what you're already doing. I guess that's a kind of a motivation. But it really doesn't make you try to think differently about anything. It presents itself as like, oh, something surprising, but it's for other people. And we're going to keep researching and working on this. There's nothing there for you to do. Sometimes, maybe there is in some TED Talks. Most of the time, I think the TED Talk is like, problem, interesting variation on the problem, and here's the solution, or the great promise of a solution that some other people are working on. And so maybe if we took fear more seriously and saw that fear wasn't just something that led, like in the Yoda theory, to hatred, that fear might be what sometimes causes us to deliberate. Fear might be what causes us to take precautions and to care for each other. I'm afraid what's going to happen to you if you do that. Fear can be a form of care. Maybe we shouldn't be so afraid of fear. So I take the opposite position to FDR. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. I think we're too afraid of fear. I think we need to be more comfortable recognizing how often we are motivated by fear and how much we have to rely upon using fear in order to organize our society. We need to be more afraid of climate change. Yes, I mean, I don't think we just need to be more afraid, right? Fear is what, as Aristotle says, causes us to deliberate. It causes us to deliberate. And if we're not afraid, we don't treat it seriously as a problem. We need more than fear, but we do need fear. We need fear. We need to see that it's a problem. And that's part of what happens with fear. And so people need to be reasoned into fear. We tend to think about fear as something that's opposed to reason. Oh, it's irrational, superstitious. Okay, some of it is, not all of it. If you don't fear, it doesn't call you to any action, you mean. Right, exactly. Or not even that it doesn't call you to any action. It doesn't kind of call you to even any thinking. A TED Talk kind of like, it's a little bit of this kind of middle brow edification type of stuff. I don't know, maybe that's what I'm doing too. So glass houses, I guess. But it kind of makes you be like, oh wow, I never thought of it that way. That's an interesting little tidbit I can say at my next dinner party. Rather than being like, this changes, now that I'm thinking about this way, I have to go change other ways that I've been thinking. It forces me to like make a turn in my life, Maybe that's too high a bar to set for speaking. But for me, that's what really motivational speaking, properly understood, would be. It wouldn't just kind of like help people to keep going to work. I think that they have enough motivation to do that. Have you seen the really meta TED Talk? I might have. I don't know. I've seen a lot of them. More than I'd like to. Because now you know my feeling about it. But you can put the link in the chat and I'll check it out later, see if it's the same one. But yeah, I know people like to do like clever ones, like a TED Talk on how to give a TED Talk, these kinds of things. Sometimes they're good. There are some interesting ones. There was one about foie gras that I found to be pretty interesting. Occasionally there are interesting ones, but so I don't want to say they're all bad. There's too many of them for them all to be bad. But I think that the formula is really not motivational. It is appeasing to a certain kind of audience. All right. The state of mind of those who feel confident. Wow. Just a little sidebar there on how much I dislike TED Talks. Didn't know that was going to come up in the stream, but here we go. People are themselves confident when they have the following states of mind. If they think they have often succeeded and not suffered, or if they have often come into dangers and have escaped. For human beings become free from emotions of fear in two ways. Either by not having been put to the test, or by having the resources needed, just as in dangers at sea. Both those who are inexperienced with a storm and those with the resources of experience are confident. So that's an interesting little thing. Both the people who are inexperienced, oh wow, this can't be too bad. And the people who are very experienced are confident. So the one group of people is confident for the wrong reasons, right? Because they don't understand the severity of the problem. But the people who have experienced it a lot, they know what to do. So they're confident for a different reason. This is kind of like it used to be called the Peter Principle in business literature. When someone gets elevated in a company, they get promoted to the point of incompetence, right? This is the joke. But I think one of the reasons that happens is people look more confident when they don't understand what's happening, when they just order other people around. And that kind of fits the executive model of leadership better, of like someone who looks confident. Whereas it's like we really associate confidence and leadership a lot of the time, which is kind of strange because should leaders always be confident? Shouldn't they sometimes be doubtful and like change their plans? Shouldn't they know when to make a strategic retreat? But we have this kind of static view of the leader as a confident man. I don't know. I'm not very convinced by that. And people became confident when something is not a source of fear to them, to those like them, nor to those who are inferior and whose superiors they think themselves to be. So if somebody who's like my junior colleague isn't afraid of something, like, well, surely I should be afraid of something. Or someone who I think is like not as good at badminton or some more dangerous activity. But why did I choose badminton of all activities? Someone who's like, I think is less courageous than me does bungee jumping. I'm like, well, if he can go bungee jumping, I should be able to. This kind of thing. And people feel confident if they have done no wrong to anybody, or not to many, or not to those from whom they fear anything. Clean conscience. And on the whole, people feel confident if their relationship to the gods is good. In case you forgot, this is an ancient text. But, people have gods today too. As known from signs and oracles and in other ways. Today my oracle said something good to me. I went to Delphi, and she seemed pretty pleased, so I'm not feeling confident. Got a little pep in my step from the oracle. Anger. Oh, man. Anger is a confident thing. I like this. Anger is a confident thing. Hope is the thing with feathers, and anger is a confident thing. And to be wronged rather than to do wrong is productive of anger. And I'm still laughing at being confident because of the oracle, but the divine is supposed to come to the aid of those who are wronged. I don't know about that. And people feel confident when laying hands to some task. They think they are not likely to suffer now or will succeed. So the matters relating to fear and confidence have been discussed. I think I might go a little bit longer. So let's look at shame and shamelessness. That'll probably be it for today. Someone in class today was like, why shame? Of all the emotions. It seems kind of, they said, it seems kind of niche. Which I thought was interesting. I'm not sure that it's that niche of an emotion. You know how the alien says, how the Hulk says, that's my secret, I'm always angry? I've been thinking a lot of stories that have this really brave character revealing that they too always feel fear. Yeah, I like the kind of moment where the motivation of a character is revealed to be something that's maybe not so obviously virtuous, right? Hobbes did define, again, anger as sudden courage, So courage is the virtue, but anger isn't really one. But maybe you can get to a virtue through something that might be a vice. It's another rhetorical device called paradiastole, of redescribing virtues as vices and vice versa. A lot of stories have this really brave character revealing that they too always feel fear. And I think it's, if you don't feel fear, and this is maybe a bit of a cliche, but I think there's truth to it. If you don't feel fear, are you really courageous? Because maybe you're just kind of inexperienced. You're like the person who's never seen you're on the ship for the first time in the storm. You're like, oh, this should be fine. And maybe things are fine, but like you weren't aware of the dangers. Someone who's really knowledgeable of the kind of dangers involved would have some fear involved. And would act despite or through or with their fear. Yeah, so I think courage does kind of involve experiencing fear. Someone who can experience fear. Like imagine if you had a physiological condition in which and some people do have variations on this, where you really couldn't experience fear. Like people who can't experience pain. That'd be very dangerous. Like you wouldn't be able to operate safely in the world for very long, because fear directs us and orients us of what not to do. if you don't feel pain, right, like you can burn yourself really badly and not realize it. This kind of stuff. Same thing with fear. Fear is important information. Of course, fear can also become pathological. You can start fearing things that ought not to be feared. Fearing things that really aren't there. Fearing things that are traumatic echoes of the past. But back to shame. Shame. In British Parliament, sometimes they will. It's much more noisy than other parliaments. I read of an AMA of someone who couldn't feel fear after a brain surgery. Oh, if you could find that, post it here or in the Discord. That would be very interesting to me. Yeah, there are all of these kinds of stories of various kinds of aphasias and strokes that people have, and we learn a lot from the experiences of people who lose various capacities. And we sometimes kind of learn things about, like, oh, I didn't realize that fear was connected to that because, it's just part of my experience. But what happens when someone loses fear? You see that there's all sorts of other things attached to it. So we do learn a lot from that. I do sometimes wonder whether we make those people into kind of because I think there's still variation, even amongst people who have strokes and lose those kinds of things. So we have to be careful in the kinds of generalizations we can make. And there also aren't that many cases of those rare things. So we tend to have a smaller sample size. But they are very interesting. I think we can learn quite a bit from them. And in fact, medical doctors and neuroscientists look at this quite a lot. Oliver Sacks basically made a career out of looking at various kinds of faculties that were lost and understanding the human side of what happened when people lost faculties. And very interesting stuff in his work, Oliver Sacks. He himself had facial agnosia. He couldn't recognize people's faces, which is maybe what motivated him to do that kind of work. Like, how do you live a life if you can never really... You have to, recognize other things about people. And that maybe forces you to attend to people in ways that you wouldn't otherwise. And in fact, one of the reasons I'm doing this stream, or these streams, is because of conversations with people who have reading disabilities. And trying to think I think that these readings are really important. How can I make readings accessible to people who have reading disabilities? I'm not sure I'm doing a good job, to be honest with you. I think I'm probably failing. But nevertheless, in trying to kind of answer that question, I've maybe discovered something else. A new way of relating to people and to the readings and making them more open and public that might have its own advantages. So there's all sorts of things that can be lost and gained in translation. Shame is not niche, though. I think that shame is a big part of a lot of societies. And one thing that is characteristic of societies where shame is very powerful. I think shame is probably not particularly powerful in America. I would say we are probably one of the more shameless societies that has ever existed. But a lot of societies have a lot of shame, kinds of parts of their culture, parts where shame is important. And it has something to do with what is seen by others. So it's a very public emotion. And you can see that all of these are kind of public emotions, which makes them fit matter for rhetoric. What sorts of things people are ashamed of and feel no shame about, and toward whom and in what states of mind, is clear from the following. Let shame be defined as a sort of pain and agitation concerning the class of evils, just bad stuff, whether present or past or future, that seem to bring a person into disrespect, and let shamelessness be a belittling about these same things. I think Japan is the other end of the extreme. Yeah, Japan's definitely one, right? In Japan, kind of shame is really definitive things. I think also in certain parts of the Islamic world, it's organized differently, but there's a lot of, often there it's more gendered, even more gendered than it would be in Japan. So shame takes different forms. In certain tribal societies or in certain traditional societies, are really high standards for masculine behavior to the extent of alienating people. Yeah, when in Japan, here's a story from Japan. Ask someone from Japan, how would you get revenge? Speaking of revenge, how would you get revenge on your enemies? You say, oh, okay, easy. Invite them to a party. Invite all of your mutual friends, because I guess you would have friends with your enemies. I don't know. And then at some point in the party, say, everyone, ding, 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 have an announcement to make, and give your enemy an expensive gift that they have no chance to reciprocate. This is a way of deeply shaming someone. Hikikomori. Yeah, I am familiar with this. In fact, I knew someone who did therapy with hikikomori people in Japan. And she did a very interesting thing where she kind of like eventually worked with many of these people. So hikikomori are people who kind of live, well, we kind of all are living inside now, but who kind of have refused to leave their rooms for whatever reason. And often they have, profound trauma. But that trauma interacts with certain features of the culture of Japan that leads to this particular... This is an interesting thing about diagnoses, because on the one hand, I think there are common features or things that tend to happen with people psychologically that go across cultures. But the way that those become enacted and the way that those become framed for people can vary tremendously on the basis of their culture. And in lots of interesting but also sometimes disturbing ways. So yeah, the hikikomori, and she was actually able to bring people out of their rooms, and they went on a trip around Japan writing haiku at various stops. I mean, it was so beautiful. What a beautiful way to help people. And I think some of them eventually went back. Some of them, it was like a nice trip. They made some friends, but they just couldn't handle it. But I think some of them started to live more public lives after that experience. I don't really remember. I'm not in close touch with her anymore. But if I do talk to her again, I'll ask her if any of those people are doing better. But yeah, why do you bring up the hikikomori? I guess that's related to shame culture. Maybe that's the idea. Yeah, shame takes many, many forms. Yeah, and I feel like Aristotle's definition here kind of shows how broad it is. Like, it's not as sharp as some of his other definitions. He's like, it can be past, present, or future. You can be ashamed of something that happened long ago in the past, or you can even be ashamed of something in the future. Like, what could that possibly be? Ashamed of the future. But he says it, so there must be something. If you think of an example, let me know. Hey, welcome to the stream. We're talking about shame. Well, they say it might have been related to the shame. Yeah, I think it is deeply related to shame. The hikikomori thing. I don't want to speak too much on it because I'm not the expert. Hey, Ring, what's up? I'm not the expert on hikikomori. But I think shame plays a lot in all sorts of the distinctive cultural formations of what happens in Japan. And I spent about 3 weeks there a few years ago. But obviously that's really not. But I did go to like all 4 islands. I saw quite a bit of Japan in those 3 weeks. And I was there as a debate ambassador, teaching people how to argue, and it was very interesting. They had very different ideas of what debate was valuable for and why you would debate. They're ashamed of their lost social identity. Yeah, because you're supposed to be kind of really integrated in society. If you haven't done something for the society, and then kind of builds up over time, that could very well be the case. I don't know. I don't want to generalize too much because I'm sure that for the individual people, it's always a little bit different. But you do eventually start to see a cultural pattern. You're like, okay, that's not how shame works in other cultures. So maybe there is something unique to Japan. Today, all my classmates changed their names to Vazu, which is the name of the kid who gets everything right, so the teacher was so confused. That's pretty clever. This is like on a Zoom call. So then the teacher always went to say, okay, Vazu, what's the answer? But everyone's Vazu. I think that's pretty funny. My girlfriend told me, she was like, everyone's named Muhammad. Like, this wasn't always a thing. I think it depends on what area of the Islamic world you're in. But like, it's become more recently with the rise of the influence of the Gulf Coast about everyone named Muhammad. And apparently there's a verse in some hadith or some surah that like when God will call the name of Muhammad first. And I just imagine everyone in paradise like turning around, like all of the Muhammads being like, huh? So like, yeah, poor Vazu. Yeah, he must have been really confused. Yes, very. He said it was bots, but it was just oh, I feel like maybe you guys hurt his feelings. I hope he's okay. Poor Vasu. I hope he wasn't ashamed of his, because it kind of is one of the things about shame or embarrassment is you kind of like call out something and you like make it visible. And so like maybe it's kind of obvious to everyone that Vasu always gets it right, but now there's no place for him to hide from the fact that he's like the smart kid or the teacher's pet or whatever. So I wonder if he was a little embarrassed by that. But, kids do this kind of stuff to each other. I hope he's okay. It is a pretty funny prank, though, I have to say. I think that's pretty funny. I like the fact that despite that everything's on Zoom and everything's really weird, the kind of hijinks of high school life continue in some way. So that gives me some hope in some strange way. I'm not sure why. Okay, so if what has been defined as shame, necessarily being shamed applies to such evils as seem in the eyes of others to be disgraceful to a person or one about whom he cares. Such are those actions that result from vice, for example, throwing away a shield or fleeing in battle. Famously, the Spartan mothers would say to their sons going into battle, come back with your shield or on it. Like, if you throw away your shield, if you come back and you desert, I, your mother, will kill you. I mean, this is a warrior society. Rain says, then we had a Kahoot, and everyone did different versions of Vasu, like Vasu and Vasu, and the teacher had no idea who to kick. See, there's cooperation. There's organization right there of just pranking the teacher. Yeah. And everyone is just a black square named Vasu. Your poor teacher, holy crap. And such as having sexual relations with those whom one should not, or where one should not. Where one should not. Yeah, be careful. Be like, oh, in the bushes, that's not, you get caught, that's embarrassing. Or when one should not. Today, on the day of my daughter's wedding, I know. So all these things matter. Sexual impropriety is deeply tied to shame, right? In the story of Adam and Eve, the realization that they are naked, the realization that they are sexual leads to shame. And this is the idea of dogs as shameless animals or animals as shameless because they're naked. For this comes from licentiousness. And such as making a profit from petty or shameful things or from helpless people. For example, the poor or the dead. Whence the proverb, he would even rob a corpse. For this comes from shameful profiteering and stinginess. That's not a good look, right? It's one thing to be Robin Hood. There's some nobility in Robin Hood. Robin Hood steals from the rich and he gives to the poor. He takes a little cut for himself and his friends. But not a whole lot of, nobody wants to name their woke trading identity as grave robber. That's not as, we tend to call those people paleontologists. Just kidding. But Egyptologists were often accused of being grave robbers early on. I had helped someone in class, and the teacher put me in the wrong breakout room. The kids were playing video games and sharing a screen when they were supposed to be doing math, and I was so confused. Yeah, that happened. Animals are unashamed. Humans are shameless. Ooh, that's a nice one. Aliens, I might steal that from you. Animals are unashamed. Humans are shameless. Yeah, and we're going to get to shamelessness. He doesn't talk too much about it. He's basically like, it's just the opposite of all this shame stuff. But shamelessness is kind of like sticking your nose at, or like sucking your thumb off at, that's not the, I have to be careful how, yeah. What is it? Biting your thumb at? That's what I think I meant. Biting your thumb at something and saying like, oh, what am I supposed to be ashamed of that? And sometimes this can be really powerful, because sometimes a society makes people ashamed of things, and then it becomes a point of conflict. Like women, often around women's bodies, of saying like, you ought to cover up. And so women kind of there's the political gesture of the slut walk, of saying, I'm going to wear whatever I want to wear, and I don't recognize your values as something I am ashamed of. So shamelessness can be the more common idea of shamelessness of someone who's just like, you're like, wow, that person is wild and out. That person's out of control. But it can also be a political act of saying, I don't accept your standards for my behavior. So it can be powerful in a different direction. I don't think that Aristotle was thinking in those lines, but I think you can draw that consequence from what he says. And such as not giving aid with money from when one can, or giving less aid. And such as being aided from those with fewer resources. If you have like a rich friend who then who still ends up mooching off of everybody, It's an extra kind of like, really? It's not a good look. That's kind of shameful. And someone who does it maybe is shameless. And such is to seek a loan under the guise of asking a favor, to ask a favor under the guise of demanding a return of something owed, to ask for the return of something under the guise of asking a favor. Starting to get the theme here. So this relationship between what kinds of exchange we're doing, this can be sources of shame. To praise with the apparent aim of asking a favor, being like a sycophant. Wow, you're so great. Can I borrow $10? And when unsuccessful, nonetheless, continuing to ask. For all these are signs of stinginess, and such as praising those present, for it's a sign of flattery. Tomorrow I'm heading to Pismo Beach. Nice. Have fun. And such as not standing up under labors that older people bear, or those who are delicate or higher in rank, or, on the whole, less able. For all these are signs of softness. So you see, all these are kind of vices. So shame comes from showing what people might think is a vice. Seems kind of obvious. And such are talking about oneself and making pronouncements and claiming the achievements of another for one's own. Ooh. And these are signs of boastfulness. This is kind of like stealing valor. You pretend to be a soldier when you weren't, or you pretend you were in combat when you weren't, or you pretend to be a frontline employee when you are not. Similarly, too, the deeds and signs and the like that result from other vices of character, for these are disgraceful and things to be ashamed of. I wonder what those are. Maybe you can fill in the blanks of other vices of character. And in addition, it is shameful not to share in the fine things of which all have a share, or all those like oneself, or most of them. This is an interesting thing. Do you think it's shameful if someone's like, I don't like music? I mean, it might be weird or sad, but from Aristotle's perspective, this is kind of a shameful thing to feel, even, much less to admit. That the fine things in life, and sharing in them, someone who's like, be like, oh, I don't like tragedy. In Athens, you would be like, what? That's shameful. By those like oneself, I mean those of the same nation, fellow citizens, those of the same age, relatives, generally one's equals. For in the first place, it is shameful not to share to the same extent in education. And education here could also be translated as culture. He doesn't mean like what level of degree do you have. That doesn't exist. So, for in the first place, it is shameful not to share to the same blah, 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 blah. But all these are more shameful if they seem to be one's own fault. For thus they now seem to come more from vice if one is the cause of one's own past, present, or future. Like if you're like, I don't really have a lot of experience with music because my parents never played it. It was against their religious beliefs or something. That might be, you might be like, oh, that's a little weird. But someone's like, oh, yeah. There's a lot of music around. It's just not my thing. He'd be like, what? I do not play Among Us. I do not play that game. But a lot of Twitch streamers are playing it now. Like Fall Guys was the big thing a while ago. And I played a few. I tried Fall Guys. It really was not my kind of game. But I think Among Us also. Cartoony games in general, not my thing. I don't really like the cartoony stuff too much. Depends. I mean, sometimes it's okay. Was the imposter? I don't know what that means. Is that part of what Among Us is? Is that Among Us? See, I don't play it. I guess is Among Us like the game Mafia? Or I play Village of Salem, or whatever it's called, which is an online game where you have to like find like who the witches are and stuff. I have to say, at first I hated Among Us. Now I'm so excited to be the imposter and kill people. Yeah, it sounds like Mafia. Yeah, I play a version of this called Town of Salem, which has been around for a long time. It's like, I wonder if it's like Among Us. Maybe I should check out Among Us, because I do like Town of Salem. It's like a Mafia, yeah. Town of Salem's been around forever. And it's like a browser-based game, but it's you kind of like are deceiving people because you're like typing things in chat, and the strategy is very involved. It's this kind of a thing. So yeah, I guess it's the similar kind of idea. There's lots of these games. People feel shame when they suffer or have suffered or are going to suffer such things as contribute to dishonor and censures. And these are things that include providing the services of the body. It's talking about prostitution. Or engaging in shameful actions. of which being physically violated is one. For submission and lack of resistance come from effeminacy or cowardice. Okay, so the Greeks had lots of strange ideas around sexuality that I have to describe, but they're related to shame, obviously. Okay, I'm not going to read the description of Among Us on stream, but yeah, there it is if you want to read it. Since shame is imagination, fantasia, about a loss of reputation, and for its own sake, not for its results, since no one cares about reputation in the abstract, but on the account of those who hold an opinion of him. We care about our reputations because of what people think about us. We don't care about our abstract reputation. What would that even mean? Right? He takes account of those who admire him, and whom he admires, and by whom he wishes to be admired, and those to whose rank he aspires, and those whose opinions he does not despise. So we don't care about everyone's opinion of us. We care about the opinions of those people whose opinion we care about. Now, people want to be admired by those, and admire those who have something good in the way of honors, or from whom they can happen to be greatly in need of something. Those people that have in their control, as lovers. So we want people who have in their control their love of us. We want them to have a good opinion of us, right? This seems kind of obvious. But they aspire to the rank of those they regard as like themselves, and they take account of prudent people as telling the truth, and their elders and educated people are of such a sort. And they feel more shame at things done before these people's eyes and in the open. Hence, too, the proverb, shame is in the eyes. Shame is in the eyes. Maybe we can relate this to what Rain is saying. My whole bookshelf is filled with murder books. And this has become really popular recently. Murder podcasts, murder books, murder shows. But I feel like in a different time, maybe not so long ago, having a deep interest in murder would have been, for some people, shameful. But it's not anymore. And I think one of the things that changes the conditions of shame is just that more people are doing something. Like, it's hard to be ashamed of something when everyone's doing it, right? So that's a way in which fashion or fads of various kinds can have political content. They can change people's attitudes. I mean, people can still be upset by, Harry Potter. There are all sorts of evangelical Christians who are upset, like, oh, it's teaching witchcraft, that kind of thing. But I think it did, nevertheless, it was so popular that it became hard to maintain that attitude. I think the same thing is happening with all sorts of kinds of sexual politics and gender politics, things that become widely adopted and quickly widely adopted can change people's attitudes, even the attitudes of people who aren't adopting them. About 5 years I started writing The Perfect Murder, and for 5 years I've still been working on to make it perfect. Well, good luck. Good luck. You know what the perfect murder is? Perfect murder weapon? An icicle. Because it melts. Anyway, that's not really my thing. But I think I understand the appeal. I love Sherlock Holmes, though. I love Sherlock Holmes. I've read those books many times. And they feel more shame before those who are not liable to the same charge, for it is clear that the opposite values seem right to them. And they feel more shame before those who are not inclined to be forgiving to people who have clearly made a mistake. For it is saying that one is not angry at neighbors when they do things one does oneself, so clearly one is angry when they do what one does not do. I had a neighbor once who used to put stakes in the lawn wherever people would let their dogs poop, and he would write on the stakes, "See what your dog did." I mean, and this became like a very comical display. So he refused to pick up the poop. And he ended up just having his own lawn just covered in stakes, which I don't know. Like, I don't really think that the point, like, at a certain point, it started to be kind of the self-own of being like, maybe you should just, like, stop putting stakes in your lawn. And I think that there were people who became angry and then, like, intentionally tried to poop on his lawn. It got out of hand. I can't believe I'm telling you this story, but yeah, Casey Anthony's story is very sad to me. Very, very sad story. Yeah, I guess I don't have the stomach for that kind of stuff as entertainment. For me, it just kind of makes me really sad that people have, like, that our society has allowed, we really failed people in some really deep way if their lives turn out like that. That's my feeling. Yeah, the most hated mother in the world. Well, I mean, at least she won a contest. She won some contest. Yeah. I don't know. People kind of like to have that character, that figure which they can put all their hate on. Be like, wow, at least I'm better than that person. I find this to be myself a little bit unseemly. Like, I don't know, I think celebrating the horrible things that someone has done, not celebrating the things they've done, but like all kind of piling on and be like, wow. I mean, in order for someone to get to that stage, some really awful things must have happened to them. Some really awful things must have happened to them. So for me, that's kind of like we were talking before, I think, before you came on the stream a little bit, Rain, about like child soldiers and, you know, victims and perpetrators. There's a relationship between that sometimes, which is difficult to acknowledge. That people who become perpetrators often at some point in their lives were also victimized. So for me, it's hard to just feel one way about those things. I mean, they feel awful and terrible, but also for me, it's a little unseemly to just be like, what a terrible person. I hope that they, you know, rot in hell or whatever. That's just my feeling, though. And among those from whom they never failed to get what they want, for among them they are in the position of those that are admired. Thus, too, they feel shame in refusing those who have asked for something for the first time, since they have not yet been held in disrespect among these. Such are those who have recently wanted to become their friends, since they have their best side, and thus the reply of Euripides to the Syracusans applies. So you have to go read what that is. According to a medieval commentator, Euripides, as Athenian ambassador to Syracuse in Sicily, said, "You ought, Syracusans, even if for no other reason except that we are just now feeling the need of you, to be ashamed to reject us, your admirers." That's kind of a funny kind of diplomatic position. It's really shameful for you to reject us when we admire you so much. Okay. And people are ashamed not only of the shameful things that have been mentioned, but of all of the signs, as those who freely indulge their sexual feelings are ashamed, not only of it, but of the signs of it. All right. Have a good time in 7th period. I hope that Vasu is okay, and that you are okay, and all will turn out for the best. Similarly, people are not only ashamed before those who have been mentioned, but also before those who will reveal their faults to them. For example, servants and friends of these others. But on the whole, they are not ashamed before those whose reputation of telling the truth they much look down on. No one feels shame before babies and small animals. See, this is why you got to read Aristotle. And once in a while, he just kind of like, whoa. I guess that is a thing. No one feels shame before babies and small animals. So in fact, the people that we feel shame before are people that we respect. And so the lack of respect or lack of recognition of someone as a kind of full, equal, or superior to us means that we wouldn't feel shame. I wonder if that's one of the reasons why a culture like American culture doesn't have as much shame. Maybe one of the weird outcomes of individualism and egalitarianism, at least as an ideology, is that you might not recognize other people as being your superiors, and therefore you feel less shame before others. This is one of the things that happened with the Quakers, because the Quakers were kind of, you do not feel shame for not paying attention to your class. Yes. Well, Rain is also an American, so, as far as I know. So, yes, that kind of shows that you're like, yeah, this class is maybe crappy or not really worth my time. And maybe it's not. And I think the casual kind of character of American society towards all these kind of institutions it really does reflect a weird consequence of egalitarianism. Because every ideal kind of has, I think, some, I don't even want to say negative consequences, but maybe some unforeseen consequences to it. Whereas Japanese society, even after it is, became a democracy, when Americans wrote the constitutions for it, there were lots of ways in which the civil society was still organized around hierarchical relationships, like the senpai-kohai relationship. And so that there's lots of more opportunities for shame, because there's a lot of people who are superior to you everywhere in society. 6th period is PE, physical education. We have to run, and 7th is just boring because I already learned all of it during the summer. Yeah, people say that in my class sometimes too, like, oh, I already read Aristotle. I'm like, yeah, but if you read it again, it might be different. I've read this dozens of times, and it's always a little different. So who knows? Maybe there's more to learn. Or maybe not. Maybe it's just really they're going to go over the same old problems. Not all teachers are looking to help students that are ahead of the curve, unfortunately. All right. I think that's... Oh, there's one more page here. And then I'm going to log off. The state of mind of those who feel shame. How does shame change the way that we think? People would feel shamed if they were in the following situations. First, if certain others were in the relationship to them that we said was characteristic of those... Okay. This is tedious sometimes when he writes like this. Characteristic of those before whom they feel shame. Like everything everything I just said. And these were those who are admired or admirers, or those by whom they want to be admired, or from whom they have some need that they will not attain if they lose their reputation. Okay. So admiration and need. These are the two big ideas. And second, if these were either seeing what is going on, as Critias said to the people in the debate about the allotment of land in Samos. For he thought that the Athenians should imagine that all the Greeks standing around them in a circle, actually seeing, and not only later hearing about what they might vote. So he's like, if everyone could see how you're voting now, you would change your vote. If God could see you, if Santa Claus, I know you like Christmas, Alice, if Santa Claus could see what you're doing right now, would he say you're naughty or nice? So being seen is part of shame. Let's go to this footnote here. The speech was probably given in 365 BCE, just before Aristotle first arrived in Athens. Athens had captured the island of Samos and debated sending out settlers there, apparently in violation of the terms of the League of 377-376. So at this point, Athens was a big empire. And so they were going to go colonize this place and violate the treaty. Just be like, we're more powerful, who cares? And so Critias was kind of making the upright, noble position of saying, how would you vote if everyone in Greece could see that you were about to violate one of your agreements? How would you vote then? Thus, too, people fallen into misfortune do not want to be seen by those who have ever been their rivals. For rivals are admirers. That's kind of an interesting little note there. We want to be thought well by our rivals. Our rivals are people who, again, are kind of like equal or better than us. And people feel shame whenever they have in their backgrounds deeds or facts that they will be seen to disgrace. It will be seen to disgrace them, I guess. Whether these are their own or those of their ancestors, or certain others with whom there exists to them some tie of kinship. Now, you might say, oh, that's just ancient society. We don't care about what our ancestors did. Oh, really? A lot of Americans, especially white Americans, or maybe exclusively white Americans, like to say, oh, well, I'm Irish, I'm Italian. My ancestors weren't slave owners. Or they're like, yeah, I'm Scots-Irish from the South, but my ancestors weren't slave owners. Nobody wants to... It's amazing that all of these slave owners that used to exist didn't have any ancestors, or didn't have any progeny. They're all gone. Everyone's free from that stain. Because people do feel like and do understand that what their ancestors did could be shameful to them. They want to avoid that. These are the people mentioned, and those who have been entrusted to them, either those of whom they have been teachers or advisors, or if there are others like themselves, to those whose rank they aspire. For people do and do not do many things out of a sense of shame, because of the existence of such people. So again, you need to have that sense of, I'm full America, mainly California though. That's pretty funny. There's a lot of people, they do polls of where do people identify themselves from. Like in London, and other parts of England, and other parts of Britain more generally, a lot of people identify themselves. Like the Scottish will always identify themselves as Scottish first, before they're saying I'm British. But in London, people are like, I'm a Londoner before I'm English. So it's interesting how different places, I feel like California is one of those places where people are like, I'm really Californian. I'm American only as a secondary thing. These are interesting kinds of rankings that people have of what they identify with. And if they are going to be seen and be associated in public with those who know their guilt, they are more embarrassed. Thus too, Antiphon the poet, when on the point of being crucified and beaten to death on the orders of Dionysius, made this remark, seeing that those who were going to die by his side covered their faces as they went through the gate. Why do you cover your faces, he said. You don't think, do you, that any of these standing nearby will see you tomorrow? So that's a little bit of a complicated story. But first of all, just the idea of hiding your face kind of shows how shame gets experienced as being seen. When people are, being walked out of like a courthouse or something, sometimes they'll try to cover their faces. And maybe there are reasons where they're like, oh, I don't want, my picture in the press. I don't want people to know. But their name is already there. People can look up their pictures often. They just don't want to be seen, even in that moment. When we are ashamed, we hang our heads down. We don't want to be looked at because it's the feeling of being seen in our truth, in the truth of who we are, that sad or bad part of our history or our present, or for some reason our future. I still can't think of what the future shame would be. I gotta think on that a little bit more. What did he mean by future shame? Not sure what that would be. Maybe something that you like, based on how you seem to be, we know you wouldn't do, like you wouldn't stick up for your friends I don't know. I don't really know what he means. Now, these things apply to shame. Clearly, we find good material on shamelessness from their opposites. So when I said that he didn't talk about shamelessness, he really doesn't talk about shamelessness. It's literally one sentence. He's like, and then I'll just make everything else an opposite, and you get shamelessness. But that's basically that period. So anyway, thanks for coming to the stream. We're just under 2 hours today. I really appreciate you coming. If you are coming to this video on YouTube, I hope that you'll stay tuned for the rest of our series, because there are a few more emotions to go. It's only 5 more pages here, but for us, a page might be an hour. Sometimes these pages don't go too quickly. But I think we have touched on, a big portion of the really important emotions or pathe for Aristotle. Anger, shame, fear. These are powerful motives for public experiences and how we organize ourselves in public, but there are a few more. I'll just give you a quick preview. See ya, aliens. A quick preview of some of the ones that are coming. Kindliness. So that'll be a nice place to start. Pity, which we talked about in class today. Pity is a really important one. Very interesting. There's a lot said about pity. Indignation, which he thinks is the opposite of pity. Envy. Of course, you got to have envy. Emulation. Basically admiration, you could say. And that's it. That's it. Those are the ones coming up. We might not get all of them in the next stream, but I'm going to give it a shot. So we have a 3-part video. Thanks again for coming to the stream. See you next time.